get out of bed and just get to vote. Grab your neighbor, grab everybody. You gotta go out because we have to win by big margins.
Chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him. And we can't be a country in disarray and have a world on fire.
I just feel like we're getting way too divided. And things are getting very divisive.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett. I want to welcome you to a special hour-long edition of America Decides live from our CBS News headquarters right here in Manchester, New Hampshire. Polls close in a few hours here, but we are getting our very first look at early exit polling at this very moment, telling us the demographics of the voters today and, more importantly, why they decided to turn out. Our CBS News data desk is analyzing that data and will be with us as soon as possible. Here is a look at a polling site in Salem, New Hampshire. Former President Donald Trump and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley are battling out here in the first-in-the-nation primary state of New Hampshire. And voters have selected here the eventual Republican nominee in the last 3 competitive cycles. Remember that. CBS News campaign reporter Jake Rosen joins us now from a polling place in Merrimack. Jake, if you would be so kind, set the scene for us.
Sure. I'm here in Merrimack. There has been a 3-to-1 margin for Republican votes so far. That includes independents voting, and that is across the entire Merrimack County here in New Hampshire. There's been people in and out of the doors for the last 4 hours. I've been speaking to voters. Independents have made up their minds, some for Donald Trump and some for Nikki Haley. But I will tell you, Major, just with speaking to people on and off camera tonight, there is so much enthusiasm for Donald Trump, and people really just didn't want to share that they feel like he can take America and put it back on track.
And Jake, the Secretaries of State office here in New Hampshire today said that it is estimated that Republican turnout will be in the 330 to 332,000 range. Kind of precise. That would be a record if I understand the history here, correct?
Yes, it would. It would set the high water mark for a GOP primary. And, you know, we'll have to see. I've been working on getting those numbers for us confirmed of what the turnout has been so far. I'm sure we'll hear that soon from the Secretary of State's office as we head into polls closing in about 2 hours. But, you know, I've seen people basically come straight from work. There's been a line almost out the door here.
And Jake, we should probably take note of the weather because when we were in Iowa, weather was an issue on the caucuses. It was very cold. It inhibited a lot of people from traveling any great distance. The weather here today, comparatively balmy, certainly compared to Iowa, but generally pretty good for New Hampshire. I wonder if that's had any positive effect on turnout.
Well, I think it's that, and I think it is this kind of two-person race. So if you are one of those people who supported a non-Nikki Haley and a non-Donald Trump candidate, you've had about a week to kind of decide, craft your argument for yourself, get a final look at the candidates, and come out. I do think the weather has been good here. It has not snowed in a couple days. There may be some inclement winter weather tonight, but as of right now, you know, coast is clear for full turnout if it's possible, and if the enthusiasm is there, Major.
Coast is clear and enthusiasm is high. Jake Rosen coming to us from Merrimack. Thank you so very much. CBS News campaign reporters Nydia Cavazos and Olivia Rinaldi join us now. Nydia is in Concord. That's the California in me pronunciation. The proper pronunciation, I've been told many times here, is Concord. We'll set that aside. And Nikki Haley, that's at Nikki Haley's campaign headquarters in Concord. And Olivia is in Nashua at the Trump election night watch party. So Nydia, let us start with you. How active today, on this very last day of the New Hampshire primary campaign, has Nikki Haley been?
Yes, well, good afternoon, Major. Nikki Haley has been really active today. She's been visiting several locations, but it just wasn't today. She's been at numerous stops across New Hampshire over the past days. It has been truly nonstop. We've been able to embed with her campaign since October, but truly what I can say is that the past couple of days have truly been different. We've been going from stop to stop. It has been truly nonstop here for Nikki Haley. Now, there's a lot of optimism for Haley. You know, she's saying she's going to work hard till the very last minute. She has managed to make this bring it down to a two-person race. So she's really confident that tonight is going to go well for her. Of course, we've pressed her numerous times. What does a win look like for you in New Hampshire? And she says she's expecting to perform a lot stronger than she did in Iowa. Of course, she's counting on a lot of independent voters, undeclared voters as well, to just come out and support her. We were with her this morning when she was at a voting location, and she's just telling people when they come out of the polling location and they told her directly. We voted for you. We trust you. We have hope for you. These are a couple of messages that she's gotten from voters. She thanks them and she says, thank you, but now it's time to bring your 5 friends, bring out your 5 family members to come out and support. She's really hopeful that she'll have a good turnout tonight.
And Nidhi, I want to ask you about Governor Chris Sununu. How close has he been with Nikki Haley in these closing hours?
It hasn't just been in the closing hours. In fact, it's been for the past couple of weeks, even during the Iowa caucuses up until that night. Chris Sununu has been tied with Nikki Haley everywhere they go. They've been campaigning. They've been rallying up the audience. Chris Sununu goes out and says, you know, we're tired of Donald Trump here. It's time for Nikki Haley. She tells voters to come out. He's been telling everyone this morning that they're just expecting a voter record turnout tonight. And really, he's been a central part to her campaign in New Hampshire. We see the difference in events when Governor Chris Sununu has been with her. There's just a lot of enthusiasm, excitement from the audience. They get excited from hearing from Chris Sununu. They trust him. They love him. He's a governor who has high approval ratings. And so this definitely has been helping Nikki Haley.
Nidhi, stand by. I want to talk to Olivia Rinaldi now at the Trump campaign watch party. The atmosphere there, if it's subdued, please tell us that, Olivia, and the overall expectations for the Trump campaign tonight.
Yeah, hi, Major. It's a little subdued behind me, but the party hasn't really started. They're waiting until the polls close to open this up to the public and have people come in. I will say on my way in, people were already waiting in the lobby. People were excited. There's been a lot of backslapping here. People think they're going to have a really good night here at this Trump watch party. I spoke with a senior campaign official earlier today who told me they're cautiously optimistic. Now, the caution is only just because in New Hampshire, they often don't vote like how they do in Iowa. Last week, Trump gave a crushing blow to other candidates in Iowa and ended up forcing Ron DeSantis to drop out of the race. But here in New Hampshire, quite often, they never quite choose what they do in Iowa. So there's where that caution comes from, but they still think they're going to have a really good night.
And when they talk, Olivia, about a really good night, do they put a number on that? Double digits? Maybe 15 points, something like that? Are they circling any number in their mind about what constitutes for the Trump campaign in New Hampshire a really good night?
You know, they haven't put a number on it quite in public. I've heard some things behind the scenes, but they do say that a win is a win when they do get asked about it. And even Trump today visited a polling site here in Londonderry where he was asked that same question, and he said the same thing. A win is a win. We had a good night in Iowa. We're hoping to have a good night here. And a win would just be historic. It's been decades since the Republican Party has chosen a winner, the same winner of both Iowa and New Hampshire that wasn't an incumbent. So that's what I'm really watching here tonight.
Olivia Rinaldi and Nydia Cavazos, thank you very much. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu still believes Nikki Haley has a path to victory. Maybe not here in New Hampshire, but overall. Some of what he told CBS News just today. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides, where I can assure you we're having a lively internal conversation with our exit poll graphic gremlins. More on that in a second. Nikki Haley is arguing to New Hampshire voters that she would give Republicans a better chance of winning in November than former President Trump. Let's listen.
You look at any of these general election polls, any of them, Trump and Biden, it's a dead heat. I'm in every one of those same general election polls. And I defeat Biden by up to 17 points.
CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent and my colleague Robert Costa joins us now. Robert, always great to see you.
Great to see you, Major.
You spoke with Governor Sununu earlier today. Primary day, he's very excited about all this. Let's listen to what he had to say, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
She's building on the momentum that she got out of Iowa. She's guaranteed herself, I think, a strong second-place finish here. And now she gets to go to her home state of South Carolina. So all those check boxes that we had about a month and a half ago, we hope we do this, 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 we've already gotten that. So now we're within a stone's throw of potentially beating Trump.
When you say it's a stone's throw away from beating Trump, what does that mean? Specifically,
it's possible.
numbers-wise.
It means
you think she can get within single digits of Trump?
Of course. Oh, absolutely it's possible. We're going to have record turnout here. This isn't some small voter turnout, just a few people of the base coming out.
You have been out front with Ambassador Haley, helping her at every turn. Are you disappointed in other top Republicans, longtime traditional Republicans, for sitting on the sidelines, for not endorsing Haley, for just staying quiet?
I'll say this. I don't mind telling you, I'm more disappointed with those Republicans that I've had very detailed backroom conversations with about Trump. I know none of them respect Trump. None of them like Trump.
Name
And now
some
they're
names.
all.
Name
No,
some
I'm not
names.
going to name names. Now they're all galvanizing around Trump. It wouldn't be, if it wasn't so serious, it would be funny, right? So none of these guys that are getting behind Trump have any respect for him. They really don't. We've all talked about it for the last 2 years. This is why most of them ran against him. It was obvious, and now they're all going to galvanize.
Are they scared of him? Is it all fear?
They're scared of, not just they're scared of him, but they're scared of the base. They're scared of being primary. They're scared of being out front and talking about what they believe and the vision they see for the country. They've all kind of put that in the back seat to kind of protect their own politics. So no, that's probably more what I'm disappointed with than anything else.
Now, Robert, Governor Sununu is a quick talker. I just want to tease out the thing he said. A stone's throw of potentially being in a position to defeat Trump. There's a lot of conditional words between.
Well, Major, I could toss a
Trump.
pebble at you right now, or I could take a rock and throw it across the room. A stone's throw is
What does
how
that
you
mean?
define a stone's
And then you put
throw.
potentially in there.
But he added, he said exactly right. Possibly a stone's throw.
Right.
I think what you hear.
They're trying to manage expectations.
Manage expectations. Because I'm hearing from my sources in the Haley orbit and the Trump orbit that this might not be close. They're hoping on the Haley side for a surprise.
Yep.
That she can close the gap. The traditional Republicans and independents are going to close strong. That she's appealing to women in this state especially. But the Trump people I'm talking to today, I know we overlap a lot in the calls we make. They're feeling very confident. Now, that's could be spin, but they're feeling confident based on their internal polling.
So the Trump campaign in New Hampshire has several surrogates, and they've been running around the state for the last 2 or 3 days. One of them, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. You also spoke with him. Let's listen to what Tim Scott had to say.
Do you expect the Republican Party to unite around former President Trump following the New Hampshire primary? Should he emerge with a victory?
Oh, of course. I think they're already coalescing around the former president as we speak. Every day it gets better. There's momentum growing every single day. The good news is that the results tonight will only create more momentum for South Carolina. I believe this race is already over.
You have known Governor Haley for a long time.
I have.
Should she not win here in New Hampshire, what do you expect her to do, knowing her for so long?
Well, she's tenacious. I know she's coming home to South Carolina. I would love for her to join the Trump team and go ahead and endorse now and not wait any time. Every day we're not talking about Joe Biden and the abysmal performance he's brought to our country is a day wasted. So I'm looking forward to getting to the contrast between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
What's your outlook on the South Carolina primary should she decide to stay in the race?
Trump by 20 plus.
20 plus, that
20
big of a
plus.
margin?
Yes.
What gives you confidence that it could be that big of a win for Trump?
Being born and raised in South Carolina.
She has said in recent days that she believes former President Trump is declining. Is that your read of the former president? And do you believe that because of those statements, it might be tough for her to ingratiate or integrate into the Trump campaign should she decide to get out?
Well, this is a big tent party. We've got plenty of room for everybody who wants to vote for Donald Trump. I think she will be voting for Donald Trump in the presidential race herself. So we're looking forward to getting the coalescing to continue and mounting towards victory in November. So I look forward to that happening. I think it happens in the next several weeks.
Are you willing to be on the ticket with former President Trump?
I'm willing to help the ticket. I don't need to be on the ticket to be helpful. The bottom line is that this should not be about me. I mean, anytime you make something about yourself, I think you're making a critical mistake.
Senator Scott predicting a 20-point plus victory
20-point
in South Carolina. And basically saying to the Haley campaign, every day that you're not on the team is a day wasted. But as of today, we heard, Robert, the Haley campaign say an ad buy in South Carolina, full plan to go there. They are sounding, and I know, and we've seen it, you can sound confident and aggressive and things pull back, but they're trying to make it appear as if South Carolina is a real deal for them.
They know it's a tough road ahead in South Carolina. What I'm intrigued by is the argument among some Haley allies that she could maybe weather a blowout of 20-plus points in South Carolina, even losing her home state, to try to make a play for Super Tuesday. and say to the Republican Party nationwide, I might not be winning every state, but I'm going to start picking up some delegates in March, might even win a state like Colorado, like Utah, like Virginia, and start to maybe look toward the convention and assert herself nationally. The question is, can she come out of South Carolina, if Senator Scott is right, with a big loss and still build a national campaign? It's a tough bet for her because she is young and she says to herself politically, I could run in 2028, and if I run in 2028, do I want to have a big loss in South Carolina on my political resume? At the same time, people close to her say, as you know in presidential politics, sometimes you only have one shot.
Right.
And if you don't see it out, you may never see it again.
And part of that message from Nikki Haley to those Republican donors is, look, you say you're not satisfied with Trump. Put your money where your mouth is. Help me carry this on, and don't leave me after one or two races, essentially.
So much is going to come down to the margin tonight. If it's 10, 15, 20 points for Trump in New Hampshire.
That's a harder conversation.
It's a harder conversation. And I think it's a harder conversation for donors. A lot of donors I'm talking to, they have their hands on their wallet tonight. They're ready to open it, but they're not rushing to open it. They want to see what happens tonight in New Hampshire. If it's clear that she's winning women, she's making inroads with women, she's making inroads with independent voters, moderate Republican voters.
And those suburban areas of whatever state that she competes in, that is a constituency of vital importance in the general election.
Plus, you have a front runner. We've never seen in history a front runner facing 2 federal trials during the election, plus everything else that's going on, from a defamation trial to a civil fraud trial to hush money payments to a porn star trial. It goes on and on. Plus Georgia. All of that's facing the front runner. So if she can stay until Super Tuesday, have some money, start winning some delegates, maybe win some states, maybe something happens to Trump. But for her, that's a big political gamble.
But also talk about this in insurance policy ways. Look, Republicans, you might need an alternative. Help me stay in and be that potential alternative.
But where are the supporters? You talk to people close to Senator Mitch McConnell. He doesn't like former President Trump.
Not at all.
But what does McConnell keep saying publicly? I'm not getting involved in the primary. So many Republicans who don't like Trump are sitting on their hands, money-wise, politically speaking, because they don't want to have the war against Trump, especially knowing he's looming as the likely nominee.
They don't want a primary fight. They don't want the backlash. They don't want the negativity. They just want to avoid that if they can. But as is often said, Robert, in politics, sometimes you have to choose.
Haley does not necessarily have a cavalry ready to come behind her, even if she wins tonight. This is going to be a lonely road for her politically. It's going to say a lot about what she wants, how she thinks about her future, how she handles the next 24 hours will be a prism into who Nikki Haley really is as a politician.
And very quickly, she has done the New Hampshire campaign style basically the last 72 hours. Wasn't doing that nearly as much. Her ground game is subcontracted to Americans for Prosperity. They got in late November. Those kind of things seem to me structural disadvantages.
I saw her today on the campaign trail, said hello to her briefly, watched her campaign in Bedford, New Hampshire. It wasn't the campaign spirit of a machine, okay? The Sununu machines behind her.
Or something catching fire at the last second.
She has soft encouragement from a lot of people. We're glad you're running.
Gentle nods.
And some people were excited to see her. But she's not a movement politician. Trump's a movement politician, whether you despise him or love him. He's a movement celebrity politician who's a nationalist, who has all of this conduct that's outside of the norms of American politics. She is within the norms of traditional Republican politics. So those who like that are saying, hey, she's one of us. It's good to see her at the polls. But those who have been taken by Trump, I saw it today with my own eyes. People would go up within a foot of her and go, Trump, Trump, Trump.
Right.
I mean, it's right in her face.
Right in her face, which is also the New Hampshire way.
And that's all coming even rougher if she stays in this race.
That'll be even rougher in South Carolina. Robert Costa, thank you so very much. We are hearing, as we talked about earlier, from New Hampshire primary voters as they exit the polls. We will break down the latest. We'll do that with our friends at the CBS News Data Desk. That is next. You are streaming America Decides.
I think New Hampshire is going to surprise everybody and that Nikki is going to be the candidate. At least that's what I'm hoping, but I have a really good feeling. She's a fighter.
Welcome back to America Decides. We gave you a quick taste of our exit polling data a little bit ago, possibly too quick, but we want to learn more about what we found out about what's on the mind of voters here in New Hampshire. To do that, Let's go now to our Elections and Surveys Executive Director and my good friend Anthony Salvanto, who of course comes to us from the CBS News Data Desk. Anthony, please tell us what we have learned thus far.
Hey there, Major. We're learning a lot. I'm going to start with this. When you look at the people who are voting for Donald Trump, the top thing they say is the reason they're doing it is that he fights for people like me. The second one is shares my values. I want you to compare that to the reasons people give when they're voting for Nikki Haley, that she has the right temperament. That's her top answer. And then secondly, but further behind that, shares my values. And there's going to be a big break here between those two things, between those two rationales. And the other part that I want to show you is this. Are you part of the MAGA movement? Well, this 32% is much lower than what we saw in the Iowa caucuses, where it was about half. And the reason I point that out, Major, is that I want to reinforce the idea that this is a very different electorate. This is an electorate in which independents can come in and vote, not just Republicans. And we know that coming into this, Nikki Haley was really counting on those independents to help bolster her, to help make her case. And so that's one of the key things we're going to be watching tonight, and that's the early indications we're getting through 5 o'clock.
And Anthony, it's been my experience here the last 3 days that there are some disaffected Republicans here in New Hampshire that are not on the Trump train, not MAGA or even MAGA adjacent, which obviously Nikki Haley is trying to talk to. But the Trump base also is strong, well organized, and they feel will be formidable. But your early exit poll talking about fights for someone like me, contrasting with Nikki Haley on the temperament side, that's a mirror image of the campaign rhetoric. Trump, I'm a fighter, I will fight, I speak like a fighter, I punch like a fighter. Nikki Haley, we can't have that same temperament, chaos, and all the other things that Trump brings that undermine electability. Those are consistent with their closing arguments here.
It is, and so let me pick up on that and show you this. When did you decide, right? We've got 1 in 5 who broke in the last few days. Now, this is fairly typical for New Hampshire, but it's important because 20% of the electorate breaking in the last few days, it can really affect a race, right? This could be worth 3, 4, 5 points on the margin, depending. So that's really important. And then let me add this, because I'm going to be watching this all night too, Major. I'm going to take in and look at the amount of college graduates that there are in New Hampshire by town. And the reason I'm pointing this out is that all night we are going to see, if the pre-election polls were right, differences between college-educated voters, college degree-holding voters with a stronger preference for Nikki Haley and non-college degree-holding voters with a stronger preference for Donald Trump. And that means that these areas here, the darker purple ones down here, south part of the state, more of the suburbs of Boston, et cetera, are going to be key areas to watch. But that tells a story about the kinds of voters and the kinds of demographics we're going to be watching tonight, Major.
Is the hair covering everything?
And Anthony, do you have any data on how New Hampshire voters participating today feel about the general direction of the country or their overall satisfaction with key things like economy, immigration?
Oh, I do. I'm going to find that. I'm going to find that slide for you here, hot off the press or straight out of the computer, as it were. The economy is the top issue, but it's really closely followed by immigration. And that's important because the other part of this is there's a widespread dissatisfaction with the direction of the country among these voters. Maybe that's not a surprise because they're the party out of the White House. And we typically see that, but it also kind of underpins the kind of rhetoric you're seeing in the campaign. You're talking about a lot of candidates who are looking to say, right, we're going to change things, we've got to do something differently. And of course, making the argument about electability, about who can beat Joe Biden. So these issues here, especially because we know there's wide dissatisfaction with the economy, not just among these voters, but with the general public, sort of reinforces the importance of that, Major.
And it strikes me, Anthony, that immigration coming in a strong second is a possible beneficial sign for former President Trump, because there is no issue on which he has hammered Nikki Haley more directly in campaign flyers and television advertising in the last closing days here than that. Anthony, we'll get back to you as you continue to digest data at the CBS data desk. Thank you so very much. Finn Gomez and Lisa Kaczynski join us now. Finn is CBS News' political director. Lisa is a politics reporter for Politico, focusing on 2024, and we're happy to say the state of New Hampshire. Finn, you saw the exit poll data. You listened to Anthony Salvanto. Anything jump out to you, good sir?
I think it's really interesting that especially the percentage of those who identified as MAGA voters was, I think, a third of what we're seeing in those exit polls. If you compare that to Iowa, which is a much larger percentage of that demographic, about half of that demographic, I think that is interesting, especially and because of that big turnout for Donald Trump in New Hampshire. So I think that is something to watch.
Lisa, you've been here in New Hampshire. This is your focus. Describe for us how the campaign strikes you as interesting, contrasting what you've seen in the last week or two that sort of jumps out to you.
What's interesting is kind of the approach here where there's, now that it is this two-person race, there is such this clear divide between trying to get out these core Republicans, but Nikki Haley needing to turn out huge numbers of independents, these non-MAGA types, really just kind of the opposite of what you saw in Iowa in a way, where independents with this electorate play such a huge role here, and that's really been her focus in these closing days.
And one thing that it's clear that Nikki Haley has to do to have any kind of good night tonight is she has to get the Kasich, Rubio, Christie vote of 2016, which was essentially a non-Trump vote and a non-Cruz sort of social conservative vote, though much smaller in New Hampshire than Iowa. Is that possible, and is that the way you see it?
Well, we've seen long lines at polls so far. It's all about turnout for her, and I hate to bring it back to that line, but that's really what it is. The more people she can drive out to the polls, and the more of those independents specifically, that is how she can do this. That is how she can capture this vote. And if she can't get that high turnout, it's not going to work.
And the Trump voters are ones who, as Anthony's exit poll data indicated, very similar to Iowa, decided early, locked in, ready to go, know when primary day is, and tend to show up.
Right, and absolutely. And they also they have a tendency to vote a little bit later in the day, so that's something that I think we should also note. I really find it interesting that, we're here in New Hampshire. We're in a state that borders the northern border, yet immigration is a top issue for these voters. We're seeing that just right up there with the economy, and we're, about 1,500 plus miles away from the southern border. Really interesting to see that.
And Lisa, tell to us about that, how it's discussed here in New Hampshire, as far away from the southern border as you possibly could be geographically. I know Maine would be farther, but it's still pretty far. But as I hear it, the last 3 days I've been here, it's not an immigration specifically, it's immigration plus fentanyl and other things that play into that. Is that how you've heard it described here?
Yes, because the opioid crisis is a huge problem, unfortunately, in New Hampshire.
It was in 2016. It was a big topic then. It still is now.
It still is. It's unfortunately not getting any better. So a lot of the concern here with immigration does come from people coming over the border and the movement of drugs over the border. And New Hampshire voters are really concerned with which candidate will have the best plan to stop that. And that's why you have heard candidates, the ones still in the race, the ones not in the race, address this every time they're here in New Hampshire.
I want to ask you the same question. Finn, you go first, and I want to ask you the same question to Lisa. When I was in Iowa, I talked to people about this rhetoric from Trump, poisoning the blood. And I said, is there anything about that that unnerves you, that rattles you, that scares you about the historical comparisons? And they said to a person, well, that's not how I hear it. When I hear poison the blood, I hear fentanyl. I'm worried about drugs. I think about it literally, not historically. Is that something you've come across?
I've come across that here.
Here,
a very similar sort of reaction to that.
I'm not trying to rationalize. I'm just telling you what they're telling me.
To others, it is nativistic. It is anti-immigrant.
Yes.
But
on a racial basis.
On a racial basis, racially offensive. It harkens back to some other sort of problematic rhetoric that we've heard in the past. But I do think that here, as Lisa said, the component of fentanyl is really, it's something you talk to people here. Everyone that I've spoken to seems to have someone that they know who's been impacted by that.
Family member.
Family, yes.
Friend of a friend,
neighbor.
something.
And there was just in the headlines today in New Hampshire, there was a fatal overdose of 3 people, right? I mean, you see this, and unfortunately, it's commonplace here.
Because the reason I ask, Lisa, is because there are those in Washington who hear that and can't understand there's any other way to process this but the Hitlerian way and go back to that root rhetoric from the 1930s. But I've heard it from people here and in Iowa. They translate it completely differently, and they see it in a different way. Have you come across that?
I have, very similarly to what you said. And look, this is, again, the difference to take the Nikki Haley angle of it is she's trying to appeal to those voters who do see it, you know, the other...
In stark and unnerving ways.
Absolutely, and that is her closing message, is trying to move away from that type of rhetoric and move away from Donald Trump and really everything about him from his demeanor on down.
New Hampshire prides itself on being a surprise place, a place where the polls say one thing, the chattering class says one thing, and the voters say something else. Does that feel like a possibility tonight?
It is a possibility, especially if the turnout does track high, but we won't know for a few more hours.
Right.
It's possible, it's distant.
Lisa, Finn, thank you so very much. Thanks, Peter. And remember, there's an invitation. Please stay with CBS News for coverage of the New Hampshire primary tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can do that however you stream CBS News. President Biden took aim at Donald Trump in Virginia at his first joint 2024 campaign event with Vice President Kamala Harris. We head there next. You are streaming America Decides.
I wrote in Joe Biden.
Why is that?
Because I've been happy with what he does. And what I like about Joe as a candidate is he surrounds himself with knowledgeable people.
Did anyone think that this is where America was going in 2024? I could go on. But look, and let there be no mistake, the person most responsible for taking away this freedom in America is Donald Trump.
If you listen to that and say to yourself, that sounds like general election rhetoric, you would not be far off. That was President Biden addressing voters today in Manassas, Virginia, Northern Virginia, which recently has been somewhat of a Democratic stronghold in presidential elections. It was the president's first joint campaign event with Vice President Kamala Harris. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now. Weijia, good to see you. Tell us about the event and how it's structurally important to this particular part of the Biden re-election campaign.
Well, the campaign bet big today on reproductive rights being a central issue, not only to bring voters out, Major, but they believe this is an issue that will help him win the general election. And as we heard today, he explicitly called out the former president, Donald Trump, for his part in reversing Roe v. Wade. In fact, we heard that from the second gentleman, from the vice president. And whereas before, this president was hesitant to name check Trump, now it is fully a different game, and he is all in. And he said that we have to remember, and told voters that we have to remember the reason why reproductive rights were taken away and what's at stake come November. Because in reality, Major, he doesn't have the power to reverse Roe, right? So he's not talking only about any actions that he can take, but he's trying to set a picture to frame this as the threat that looms if he loses. But Major, I have to tell you, this is a relatively small auditorium. There were hundreds of people here, but throughout the entire speech, which was about 10 minutes long, he was interrupted time after time, at least a dozen times. It was clearly a coordinated effort because there's something else on the ballot in November, and that is his foreign policy, his Israel policy. And there are many people here who interrupted his train of thought, who interrupted his speech. And the president was clearly irritated at that, Major. But, you know, he was able to forge through the speech, of course. But I think that's something that we should expect to see, as we always do every election year, moving forward.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Weijia. Progressive Democratic disapproval, and that's probably putting it mildly, with the president's approach to Israel and the ongoing war against Hamas in Gaza. Again, coming up, as you saw in that event, and something I've heard here in the last 3 days in New Hampshire among Democrats. Speaking of Democrats here, One thing that's on their mind, Weija, is the president never came here. His name is not formally on the ballot. The Democratic National Committee is not recognizing the New Hampshire Democratic primary. Explain the backstory of all that, if you'd be so kind.
Right. Well, his name is not on the ballot officially. However, there is a write-in effort to get his name on the ballot. And, you know, honestly, here it's interesting because there are two split views of this, and it seems there are some Democratic strategists who want those voters to write him in, and there are others who want to move forward and really look at Super Tuesday in the states coming up. And so, you know, the fact is, Major, that he chose to have this rally, the first joint rally with the vice president, on this day, the primary in New Hampshire. And so that sends a loud message, but certainly they are gearing up for what is expected to be a much busier campaign, not only focusing on New Hampshire, because they're not officially, but at all those other states coming up.
You know, and Weija, it's interesting here. I talked to Congressman Ro Khanna, who came up here on Saturday on behalf of the Biden write-in campaign, and he got some questions, and there is some low-level nervousness here about people displeased with the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, not writing in Joe Biden or Joseph Biden or President Biden, but writing in ceasefire now on their ballots here in New Hampshire. And if that happens in any measurable numbers, that would be consistent with some of that sentiment you saw in the event today.
Well, Major, because when you look at the states that are going to have the loudest voices in the upcoming election, and you look at how much the president won by in 2020, there are small margins that we're talking about. So perhaps the anger that we are talking about, that we saw today with regard to the president's Israel policies, perhaps that won't be enough for the voters to vote for whoever the Republican nominee is. But in those cases, especially if it is enough to get them to abstain and not vote at all, then that could be a vote for the opponent here. And that's why it is such an important, critical issue, Major.
Weija Jiang, thank you so very much. CBS News exit polls are revealing more and more about the voters, why they showed up, and what was on their minds. We will check back with our Elections and Surveys Executive Director. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. A beautiful Merrimack River in downtown Manchester, New Hampshire. Welcome back to America Decides. We are hearing more from New Hampshire primary voters about why they decided to come out to the polls. So let's go now to our Elections and Surveys Executive Director, Anthony Salvanta, who comes to us from the CBS News Data Desk. Anthony, one of the conversations I've heard here in New Hampshire from Republicans is political success can or should immunize former President Trump from whatever legal travails he faces, criminal or civil. That's not true, but that's something they talk about. And I believe you have some exit poll data on what voters think about whether or not Trump gets convicted and what that might mean for them. True?
True. I think it's central to this, and I want to compare it to what we just saw in Iowa last week. So start with this. Right now, again, tell everybody, this is in real time. These are the voters that we've talked to this point. They are still voting, so these will update. But half of this electorate says that Donald Trump, if convicted of a crime, would, in their minds, be fit to be president. That's important. Two reasons. One, that's lower than it was in Iowa, where it was about 2/3. And that's going to be central to some of the arguments, especially for the voters who are not voting for Donald Trump. This is going to be one of their central concerns. But the other part of this is, if you look nationally at this, those indictments for Donald Trump's supporters have only boosted his standing. They have told us in polling that they see that as a reason to support him more, that they think those indictments are politically motivated, and it's actually strengthened his support, whereas then on the other side, for people who aren't voting for him, it's increasingly, or it has been, a real cause for concern, Major.
And Anthony, that could be a classic primary nomination conversation, but not one that transfers helpfully to a general election conversation. I know we don't have any exit polling data on that. That's just a notion that I know is of concern to the Trump campaign, and it is part and parcel of Nikki Haley's argument. Look, this is a real deal. It's not going away, and you should look at an alternative. What do we know, based on the exit poll data so far, Anthony, about turnout?
Great question, really important. Also, we're estimating it right now, and this is just based on what we're seeing so far in those exit polls, at about 300,000. That, if it holds up, would be headed towards a record, would head to break a record, which is really interesting because I think part of this, as we watch all through the night, is going to be whether that's fueled by this influx of independent voters. They don't have a competitive Democratic primary to be in, so maybe some of them are going to come where the action is as they see it, and that could boost things. And then we'll see if there are some voters who are in this primary, not just to support Donald Trump, but maybe to try to stop him. If he's been the polling leader, does that influence some independents who come in? So that's one of the big things behind this turnout, and I think it'll be really instructive. The higher turnout goes, probably the more of those independents we'll end up seeing in the final composition, Major.
Anthony, very quickly, and this is not necessarily an exit poll data question, but it's a turnout adjacent question. When you think about tonight's returns, where are you looking to find trends for the evening?
We're all about turnout adjacent here at the data desk, Major. I'm going to show you this. We're going to take a look at, for one thing, at the past performance from the 2016 primary, and Donald Trump did well all over, quite frankly. But there are pockets where John Kasich did relatively well, where Marco Rubio, though he doesn't win any townships, did relatively well. And that's going to be in a couple places. That's going to be here along the western edge of the state, number one. But then the other place I'm really looking is down here in what are effectively the greater Boston suburbs, as well as Nashua, Manchester. And what's important there is they've got a higher number of college degree holding voters. And those folks, if they turn out in force, we know at least from the pre-election polling and some indications from the exit poll that they have been more for Nikki Haley. So those are the places, if we start to see real big spikes, could be really telling, Major.
And one other thing you should know, ladies and gentlemen, many polling places in New Hampshire will close at 7. Some will stay open until 8, so all polls will not be closed until 8 p.m. Eastern. Anthony Salvanto at the data desk, thank you very much. I'll be back at 8 p.m. Eastern for live coverage of the New Hampshire primary results. Please join us however you choose to stream. That does it for this hour. I'm Major Garrett from Manchester, New Hampshire, and you are streaming CBS News.